The legendary Pat Martino has been one of the world's most influential and respected musicians in modern jazz for nearly 3 decades. His incredible technique is accented by his long, flowing melodic lines filled with passionate expression and precision. Pat is equally at home performing explosive hard bebop and jazz fusion or his romantic solo guitar arrangements. REH and CPP are very proud to present for the first time Pat Martino in this 2-part instructional video series. Today, in Part 1, Pat discusses and demonstrates his unique approach using the diminished chord as a parental form for constructing chord voicing and as a vehicle for developing improvisational fingerboard positions. Later, in a special interview, we'll hear Pat talk about his custom-built instrument and his philosophy on life playing the guitar. So we hope you enjoy getting to know and learning from this truly special musician, Pat Martino.
Hi, my name's Pat Martino. I want to welcome all of you to this session, and I'd like to let you know that it's really a treat for me after so many years of functioning to finally have a chance to place our attentions upon some intimate feelings and opinions on this, our instrument, the guitar. Before we go any further, I would like to just offer you a single tone to make sure that we're all in tune together. I'm going to give you an A. I'll give it to you twice, and in the process, tune up to me. In the upcoming moments, we're going to be covering quite a number of ideas. Some of them are including the guitar in a different way of looking at it. It's been taught quite a number of different ways, and for each of us it's comfortable or non-comfortable. I hope that in the moments we do spend together that you gain some insight by looking through the windows of my house. Some of the things that we're going to be sharing are the positions on the instrument, dividing the instrument into different quadrants, such as first position, second position, third and fourth. We're going to be talking about string groups, the use of different strings for different chordal clusters and their inversions, alterations included. And also some of the automatic things on the guitar, which I think will be important for me to bring to your attention, that a great number of these different approaches that I'm going to share with you have come through experience, and almost in a very odd way, such as an after effect, due to the fact that in my earlier years, when I first came out as a teenager, I did not have the ability to read or write music, and I had no idea what the names of these things were called until some way down the line it became extremely appropriate and also a responsibility on my part to be able to answer questions with players that were sharing my time with a great deal of value on their own part. So I more or less in many cases had to take a look back and find out the true terms of a lot of the things that I learned how to play naturally. An important thing also is that the majority of dexterity that I have gained through the years in their early stages came from listening to records, such records as West Montgomery, the Montgomery Brothers, in those years recorded on the Riverside label. A great example was Grooveyard. I learned how to play these things by listening to the record and sitting down with a guitar, very much like today with transcribers who also have the facility of variable pitch. In those days we didn't have that. And I learned how to play these things by ear. So now it's gone a long way, and I think it is important to bring to your attention that this is an addition to all of the forms that I learned naturally from the guitar and a very intimate relationship with it. In the process that is coming up, I hope that you gain insight, a deeper understanding of a different way of looking at things. One of the things that you're going to notice quite different than most is the addition of what I refer to as parental forms on the guitar. In the case of these systems, the augmented and the diminished chord, broadly stretched across all of the different string groups. And I hope, as I said before, that you gain insight and prosper from this sharing. Welcome to the club, and let's get started. Okay, I'm going to start this particular section based upon two automatic things on the guitar. The first is going to be the diminished form, and there are different string groups for this form. The first group that we're going to talk about is the 4-3-2-1 group, which is the fourth string, the D string. The G string is the third, the B string is the second, and the E string is the first. It looks like this. There, amongst other things on the guitar, such as dominant seventh chords, a C7, for instance, its four inversions automatically look like this. The first being here, the second being here, the third being here, and the fourth being here. They're all on the 4-3-2-1 group, but they're not automatic, as you can see, primarily because the fingers forming these chords are in two different types. Two are full use of four fingers. This one here, the C7th here, and the C7th in the fourth inversion here. And there are also two bar groups, automatic, not using all four fingers. First there, and in the third position being the second. These are coming from the diminished form, which is totally automatic, which is a great difference between all of the other chords on the guitar, with one difference being in the augmented form. The diminished looks like this. So it's totally automatic. One of the few things on the guitar that you really don't have to learn per se four different fingerings in your study of the instrument. But one thing does take place in the diminished form that is extremely rewarding, and that is that once this form is played and its 4 inversions are captured, then it begins to unravel quite a number of children. I would normally refer to these as children. It's a parental form. By doing the following, these shall begin to appear. This particular chord, the E diminished, named because of its position on the 4th string, the 2nd fret, that would be E, so we're going to call it, for the moment, an E diminished. By lowering the E to an E flat, it automatically becomes the root of a dominant 7th chord, in this case, E flat 7th. Back to the E diminished. That is the first inversion. Automatically, the second inversion would participate in this area of the guitar. This time, the E natural is on the 2nd string as opposed to the first inversion, which was on the 4th string. Here's your E natural. By lowering the E to E flat, you automatically have an E flat 7th. Back to the diminished chord itself. The 3rd position for the inversion of that chord would be located here. Now the E, as a singular tone in that stack of 4 notes, is located on the 3rd string. By lowering that particular tone 1/2 step, it becomes an E flat. And here you have the 3rd inversion of E flat 7th. Back to the diminished. Raise that up to the next inversion. Now the E is on the 1st string. Lowering that 1/2 step brings it to an E flat on the 1st string, and your 4th inversion is here. Therefore, from the beginning, we have E flat 7th, 1st position, full 4 fingers. The 2nd position of the E flat 7th is again 4 fingers. The 3rd inversion is the first bar form of E flat 7th, the 3rd position, and the 4th position is the 2nd bar form, E flat 7th, here. Now we have these forms to control. The reason I bring it up in this particular way is so that it isn't necessary to memorize, study by study, all of these different forms. They automatically unravel themselves. And this will continue, and I think you'll see more and more of this as we go along. I took and began that with the 4th string, the lowest of the 4-string group being 4, 3, 2, 1, from the E diminished. Now if we go to the 3rd string, being the basic source of motion from the lowest part of the guitar to the higher part, we'll take it from B flat. In that chord, that what we did call an E diminished is now a B flat diminished. By lowering the B flat to an A, we now have an A 7th. So, 1st position is here. Same kind of a bar chord that was in of the 2 of the 1st group. A 7th, 1st position. 2nd position for the diminished chord, B flat diminished. B flat to A becomes A 7th in this condition. 2nd position. 3rd position, the diminished chord, one more time, being hereabout. By lowering the B flat to an A, automatically we have an A 7th again, which is the 3rd position of A 7th. Back to the next diminished chord, which is the final one in the 4 inversions, being here. Now the B flat is on the 2nd string, lowered to an A, becomes an A 7th in this area. So now we have these 4 inversions. Automatically. That's 2 of the 4 strings being used. The first was E diminished, the 2nd was B flat diminished. The 3rd will be C sharp diminished or D flat diminished. Now we're starting with C sharp or D flat, however you would like to see that. with those particular tones. By lowering that C sharp to a C natural on the second string, we have a C7th in its first position. Back to the diminished chord. Its second inversion. The C sharp now is on the third string. We now have a bar formation of the second inversion of C7th. Back to the diminished. Next inversion, third position. The C sharp is now on the first string. By lowering the C sharp to C natural, now we have C7th in this bar form, its third position. And the final one, fourth position of it, is C sharp on the fourth string, lowering it to C natural. Here you have your C7th, of four inversions played this way. Automatic. Back to the first diminished chord. It has been known as E diminished, B flat diminished, C sharp diminished, and finally the first string calls it G diminished. By lowering that G on the first string 1/2 step down, it becomes the root of this particular dominant seventh chord, G flat. Your first inversion automatically. Its second inversion has the G, the root of that diminished term, on the fourth string. By lowering that 1/2 step, we now have the second inversion of that G flat seventh. Back into its diminished parental form. Automatically moving up the fingerboard a minor third, 3 frets higher, we now have the G on the second string of the 4-string group. So here we have G7th, or G diminished, to a G flat 7th in its third position on a 4-3-2-1 group. The final position, the fourth position, places the G on the third string. By lowering it 1/2 step, it becomes G flat 7th, once again automatic in the fourth position. Now we have this series of inversions. First position, second position, third position, fourth position. Now let's consider this. If we take this diminished cluster, this parental form, and we already know from our discussion so far that there are 4 dominant seventh forms that come from this chord, which is 4-dimensional in a sense. It has 4 identities. So here now, if there are 4 dominant seventh chords in this group, there are also 4 dominant seventh chords in this group, and 4 more in this group stacked vertically. Now we have 12 keys of these dominant seventh forms in this singular collection of strings, so that on the 4-3-2-1 group of the diminished chord, before we get to its second inversion automatically, we have this many chords. 4 here, 4 here, 4 here, and then we have the first mirror image of the 4 groups in its second position automatically, which begin here. Come one given topic, no matter what it might be. It is important to be able to take this basic information of these diminished forms and be able to draw from them the advantage that they offer for alterations on any kind of chord that you want to use on any group of strings accordingly. So that in the case of the diminished chord, as it initially was on the 4-3-2-1 group, it can be applied so that it becomes automatically a dominant seventh chord. In the case of this one here, E flat 7th, or any of the others in it, C7th would be just as appropriate. By taking that C7th and lowering the third of that particular major scale, you then take the E and drop that to an E flat. It's a C minor 7th. And now you have altered that to a functional chordal form for your own vocabulary, to more or less just stock up and bank it, so that you can use it anytime you want it. If you take it then and alter that by lowering the fifth or raising the fifth, in this particular case, we're lowering it to a flat 5. Here's your C minor 7 flat 5. So all of this coordinately comes from the parental form, and it breaks off into numerous children. And I think that what we're going to be covering now is how to gain dexterity in these, within the application throughout the fingerboard topically. We've covered quite a number of events that have been governed by the 4-3-2-1 string group. In the case of the initial parental form, this E diminished, by the same token B flat diminished, by the same token C sharp or D flat diminished, and also G diminished. One of the things on the guitar, especially idiomatically speaking, in the jazz genre, rhythm and blues genre, bebop, and so on and so forth, certain groupings for voicings of chords in their own right have been governed by a number of string groups that are kind of passive to some other forms such as fusion. In this particular case, this group, 4-3-2-1, is an adjacent group. In other words, the strings in their own accord are adjacent to one another. They're in a row, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Another example of the same phenomenon is going to take place on the inside 4 strings, which would be 5, 4, 3, 2. And in this particular case, they would be functioning in this context. And by the same token, everything that has happened with the 4-3-2-1 with automatic dispersal of all of these children of this parental form by lowering any single tone on each of the strings 1/2 step down, it also becomes the root of the dominant 7th chord in that family. On the 5th string, it's D flat this time. Now it's C 7th, which is a different inversion of the 4-3-2-1 group, but the same chord. Back to the diminished. By lowering the G to G flat, we have a G flat dominant 7th on the 5-4-3-2 group. Back to the diminished. B flat to A is your A 7th. Back to the diminished. E to E flat is this configuration of the E flat 7th. So now we have 8 forms, 4 keys here, 4 keys here, of the same grouping. The next adjacent group would be here. Adjacent because now there's 6-5-4-3 group. These are the strings in use. By lowering any single tone in this group, the G to a G flat gives us this very fat sounding dominant 7th chord. G flat 7th. A lot of use in terms of pumping a really dynamic kind of pulsating, very pulsating form as a cluster. So here's your G flat 7th, coming from this diminished chord, G diminished in this case. If I lower the D flat of that diminished chord to a C, here's my C 7th. Okay. The next one would be the E flat 7th. E to E flat. Back to the diminished chord. The A 7th would come from the B flat to the A natural. These are all of the adjacent groups. One more time as the diminished chords themselves. Three adjacent groups. If we then take that first 4-3-2-1 group and take what is automatic from it, such as these 2 strings being totally the same, only 2 octaves in difference, we then place that there, and what's left is this. Again, this automatically inverts itself with the same fingering up the neck. And in this particular case, we're going to call these non-adjacent groups because they're not in a row. There are certain strings that are not being used. In the case of this voicing, 6-4-3-2, the fifth string is dead or blunt. The other adjacent group of the 5 common groups would be 5-3-2-1. And in the same, according to all of the other information that has led us to this, by lowering any single tone, it becomes the root of a dominant 7th chord. D flat to C, C 7th. B flat to A 7th. E to E flat, E flat 7th. G to G flat, G flat 7th. And that's on a 5-3-2-1 group. On a 6-4-3-2 group, non-adjacent as spoken of, G to G flat, G flat 7th. E to E flat, E flat 7th. B flat to A 7th. C sharp to C, C 7th. In the case of this particular group, you're going to find that in doing this, coming from the diminished parental form, you can lower it to a dominant 7th. Then if you lower the 3rd, you have an automatic minor 7th in that group. If you take that at the dominant 7th, as it was, and raise that 7th, you'll have a major 7th. These formations are appropriately termed for the idioms that I brought up to your attention prior to this moment in jazz and in rhythm and blues. You will see that in many jazz forms you're going to hear a major 7th chord like that. Or if you take the 5th once it's altered to that and lower that, you'll have a major 7 flat 5, which sounds like this. If you take it from the dominant 7th, from the diminished to the dominant 7th, and lower the 3rd, you'll have the minor 7th. And if you lower that 5th, you'll see another common form, a common group from these forms, used in jazz quite a bit. A minor 7 flat 5. In this particular case, we took it from G diminished to G flat 7th to G minor 7th to G minor 7 flat 5. By the same token, all of the inversions that came automatically from these parental forms will act accordingly to enhance your repertoire of forms for your future engagements. Second inversion, G to G flat 7th. Taking the 3rd of that G flat 7th, which in this particular case is the B flat, lowering that, here's your G flat minor 7th. If you take the 5th of that, which is the D flat, and lower that, you're going to have the G minor 7 flat 5 here now. Back to the diminished chord, 6-4-3-2 group. The 3rd inversion would place the G up here to G flat. Here's your G flat 7th. If you lower the 3rd, which is here now, you have your G flat minor 7th here. And if you lower the perfect 5th a half step, you have your 3rd inversion automatically of that particular form. Back to the diminished parent. We're going to lower the G to a G flat. Here's your dominant 7th. Lower the 3rd. In this particular case, B flat to A. Here's your minor 7, G flat minor 7th. And take the 5th, which is the D flat. So now you see you have 4 automatic inversions of another family of forms used quite commonly in another kind of, idiom of jazz. So by the same token, the way these formations cluster themselves on areas of the fingerboard, going in ascent across the board, so that you have 12 frets, from an open to a double fret at the 12th fret, the octave. You now have every area of activity governed by these potentials. Unlike quite a number of players who are focused upon modal interaction with chord forms, alterations in those chord forms, intervallically as well as modally, I find it most comfortable of all to use the minor 7th constantly. And when I say the minor 7th, I'm not specifically referring to scalular use, the normal minor scale, the harmonic minor, so on and so forth, or by the same token, modally, being with the Dorian mode, the Lydian mode, Mixolydian mode, and all of these interacting with transcribers in the past, I've come to see that a great deal of my playing has been analyzed along modal points, and it really, I've never given any thought whatsoever to this approach. I think of things primarily in a very simplistic kind of way, which I refer to in a general context as a minor 7th. The minor 7th, of course, in my context has been, through experience, quite a number of line forms that I find extremely pleasing. So that this, when I play something like this, in the case of a C minor, being a substitution for an F7th, and that F7th could be an F13, it could be quite a number of things, an F7 sharp 5, an F7 sharp flat 5. In my case, I generally refer to it as a minor 7th. Here, if I were to play against this chord here, which is an F13, I think of it in context with the minor 7th as a substitution for this form, and in doing so, I go a perfect 5th in the key of F, which is the C. So I think of a C minor 7th that will fit this through experience. The context, or what is included in the patterns that I will play, come through experience and not through analysis. So that this particular form here is melodic and not scalular in any way. If I do this, this has nothing to do with scalular forms, intervallic forms, modal forms, even though they can be analyzed and proportionately given titles that fit in an accurate kind of way. I personally, this is second nature to me through experience of things that melodically work and are pleasing to me. So the first position of this F7th would be here. The second position would be in this area, still C minor 7th. The third position would be in this area of activity. And these all are condensed into melodic statements of personal use. And the fourth would be here. So here I've got an area of activity, and in this particular case, even though underneath the topic is F13, the key of the dominant 7th in F, I'm thinking of the same areas of activity, vertical activity, in 4 positions, solely based upon the C minor 7th chord. Since we've been talking about substitutions such as the minor 7th that I find comfortable against the dominant 7th, which again is one of the forms that is issued by the parental form being the diminished chord itself, we had 3 in a row giving us 12 keys, 4 per cluster. In the sense of the cluster itself, the E, B flat, D flat, and G diminished, having 4 dominant 7 chords here, 4 here, and 4 here, 3 in a row, give us 12 keys. The next series, or the second position of these formations, would be the second position, or the second inversion of the first group, being as so. And there are 2 more to go after that, as so. Before we get to that, getting active on the guitar across the fingerboard, the higher we go, I would like to bring to your attention the importance of fluidity in the first series itself, which is 3 diminished chords in a row, giving us 12 keys, 4 keys in each of these stacks, as so. So that here, I'll change it all to, instead of dominant 7s, minor 7s. First, starting with B flat minor 7th for the E flat diminished, rather for the E flat dominant 7th, E minor 7th for the A 7th, G minor 7th for the C 7th, and D flat minor 7th for the, that would be the G flat 7th. And then we're going to push that up 1/2 step so that we have a stack of 12 keys. The first one being here, and I'll call them as dominant 7th forms. E dominant, E flat 7th would be here. The next one would be A 7th. The next one, C 7th. The next one, G flat 7th. Okay, you see I'm adding also phrasings and rhythmic forms that I know through experience in performance and on stage, certain things that infiltrate excitement in the crowd. We're putting out dimensions of powers, dynamics, and melodies at the same time. So these are things that we'll talk about at some point in this discussion. So that's the first 4 keys. And if you raise those 1/2 step, that B flat minor 7th as a substitution for the E flat 7th becomes B minor 7th. We're still in this area. And here once again I'm taking it up and in ascent and in descent. Okay. The next one being A 7th is now going to be B flat 7th, being an F minor 7th as the demonstration itself for a substitution. The first position being here. Or even here. One more time, descent, ascent. The next chord being an A flat minor 7th, which is the substitute for a D flat 7th. And that particular D flat 7th being here as an A flat minor 7th, this area is the area of activity. The next one being D minor 7th for a G 7th. And that particular G 7th would look like this is one of the bar structures talked about a moment ago. The D minor 7 now is in here. Okay, the next one will be C minor 7th for an F 7th. And that particular one, keep in mind that we now have we've covered 8 of the dominant 7th chords in this vertical stack out of 12 keys in the full inversions. So 3 inversions of the diminished chord, we're on the 3rd one now, which is in the first position. This one here, F sharp or G flat to F natural, gives us an F 7th. And the substitution for that is C minor 7th, and I'm using it here. Always think of phrases and choruses, lines that really flow and move accordingly to your own personal feelings, energy. That was on the F 7th, and it was the C minor 7th. The next one would be G flat minor 7th, and I'm using that G flat minor 7th as a B 7th, which would be coming in this particular case from this bar form, again from this third diminished in a 3-fret row. By dropping the C to a B, it's a B 7th. And its alternating substitution, the B 7th is going to be a G flat minor 7th. G flat minor 7th, area of activity at random parts. The next one is going to be an A minor 7th, and that being for the following D 7th cluster in this position. Here's your D 7th, which again came from an E flat diminished. E flat on the second string, down 1/2 step to a D makes it a D 7th. And for the substitution for that, I'm using one more time my own personal comfort, is the A minor 7th. Okay, the A minor 7th for the D 7th in that cluster. The next one is going to be E flat minor 7th, and that's for the A flat 7th. The final one in that group is another bar chord, being here. Again, we have the diminished chord, 4, 3, 2, 1 group as spoken about earlier. The A is on the top, 1/2 step down becomes the root of the A flat 7th. And I'm using as a substitution E flat minor 7th. Okay, that's all 12 keys solely in this area. Now, if we think about that as we thought about these, the parental forms of these motions of activity through all the keys, we had this in mind. 12 keys. The next inversion of the first is here. The next inversion after that would be here, and the final one up here in the fourth. If we take the diminished chord, 4 inversions, and we turn them all into E flat 7th. The first inversion would be here, as I've demonstrated. The second inversion would be here. The third inversion would be here. And the fourth inversion would be here. Okay, so now you see that I have the entire fingerboard of the guitar being in one key, and better yet, as one topic of activity across itself. And we haven't talked about what I personally use to connect these activities, and in many cases, intervallic use is very helpful. In my case, it's chromatic in context. So that if I'm in ascent from, let's say, up here, or better yet, from descent, I'm thinking about these areas of activity for the E flat 7th. The first one is here, from high up. The second one would be here. The third one would be here. And the fourth one would be here. So that if I wanted to connect these things at random, and of course in the midst of spontaneous combustion is extremely important, it would happen like so. So I'm thinking of E flat seventh, and for the substitution in my case, it would be a B flat minor seventh. The guitars that I've had have been extremely intimate relationships with identities in their own right. They've been full of all kinds of spontaneity and stimulation. This particular instrument has been a gift from a fine luthier from Puerto Rico, currently in Long Island, New York City. He made this as a gift for me. I was performing at the Bottom Line in 1985. And Abe Rivera, that being his name, came to that particular performance, at which time I was using one of Tommy Bumina's sweethearts, Polytone, solid body. And Abe went out of his way to make sure that I would be pleased with a personal reaction on his part. And he designed and carved by hand and inlaid this in such a way that he really floored me with it, you know. One thing that is amazing is the weight of this instrument. Has been made with a number of exotic woods, types of wood that have been shipped in, imported, and it's an extremely heavy instrument. So, as far as being hard to play, difficult to play, that's a state of mind, and it comes down to adjusting oneself to the tools that we have to work with, and they become secondary after a while, and you don't feel what you would normally feel when you're free of mind and you walk up to an instrument solely as a separate unit in its own right. Then you feel the weight of it. You can more or less analyze the difference between what you were using at that time by comparison, and that's how that works. In this particular case, I fell in love with it when Abe presented it to me as a gift, and from that moment forward, it's been very difficult to pinpoint anything different, due to the fact that it's very holistic in my relationship with it. As far as the string gauges that I use, rarely do I use them through comfort. There are many other practical reasons for me to choose what I manipulate at any given time. In the case of most of the guitars that I've ever used, with the exception, let's say, of the Adamas that the delightful Kamen brothers presented to me as a gift some time back, being nylon with a graphite top, is a little different than this type of instrument. The gauge on these strings, comparatively to the nylon strings on that particular Adamas, these are heavy gauge, very heavy gauge, for a number of reasons. I never have focused my attention upon picking and attack in terms of the amount of pressure that I use on the plectrum that I'm working with at any given moment. But there is one thing that is in common and very consistent throughout the years that I've used guitars. I have a tendency of picking extremely hard, and this causes me to depend upon a very heavy gauge string at any given moment, because I have a tendency of breaking strings like rubber bands. So due to the fact that I formulate a very staccato type of attack, it's demanded upon me to use heavy gauge strings. On the instrument at this given moment, I'm using a 16 for an E, rather a 15, I'm sorry, 15, a 17 for the B, 26 for the G, 36 for the D, 46 for the A, and 56 for the E. Normally, I use a 16 for the E, an 18 for the B, 26 for the G, 36 for the D, 48 for the A, and 58 for the E. And that really gives me a very powerful staccato feeling. Pioneering plectrums in terms of their quality, the type of substances used for the plectrum in itself. I've lived a very silent life, a solitary bird, so to speak, in the early days as a sideman, traveling on a constant basis into strange places, and during those years I would enjoy taking a walk into a forest or a beach, and I would find pieces of wood coincidentally in the shape that would of a plectrum that would fit very well, and different stones and pebbles from beaches and from different ground lays that after a while became a very mystical experience for me, and it enhanced a great deal. Now I'm using, at this particular time, I'm using extra heavy picks in terms of the type. I enjoy using picks of this size, triangular in shape, due to the fact that I have a tendency of wearing them down to certain degrees where they become intimately different from each other, the different sides. So that very much like a regular pick, this is a Fender extra heavy, very thick, and also gives me control from this end, a wider area. This being also a Fender, it's an extra heavy as well. And in the use of one of this nature with a pointed end, there are times when I use that accordingly so that I can get the sound. There's a very sharp staccato. As opposed to the round side, which I'll switch over and play like that for a much more warmer, as opposed to this one. So I have EQ, equalization, from the plectrum itself in a very useful way, so. Yeah, I think it's important to keep an open mind to music, including all kinds of music. We're in a global warming of an intake, an impasse of so many different cultures and types that new forms of music are constantly on the upgrade, primarily because they're all blending together with a larger vision of a collective, unified reality. It's happening at all times. And you are affected whether you hear it or not, including myself, and I think it's good to keep an open mind.
This concludes Creative Force, Part 1 with Pat Martino. We hope you'll join Pat for Part 2 as he demonstrates improvising over various chord progressions using his minor conversion concept. He also discusses the augmented chord as a parental form for developing interesting triadic structures. And finally, learn some of Pat's hauntingly beautiful solo guitar arrangements.